Gerald Friedman wrote this at Dollars and Cents. Senator Bernie Sanders has proposed an ambitious program of social reform, including regulatory changes to raise wages and protect workers' rights, progressive tax reforms, and universal health insurance. Taken together, these policies would not only dramatically increase employment and national income, but also would raise wages, reduce poverty, and narrow the gap between rich and poor Americans. Oh, shit. What is this? Right? 1. The Sanders program will end wage stagnation. I project that under the Sanders program, real wages would grow by 2.5% a year, returning to the growth rates of the late 1990s. Faster wage growth would result from 1. Faster economic growth, which would raise wages by improving the bargaining position of workers, and 2. Government regulations restoring the real value of the minimum wage and protecting workers' rights to overtime pay, equal pay for women, and workers' rights to organize unions. In addition, universal health insurance financed through progressive taxation would lift the burden of health insurance premiums off workers and employers, freeing up employers' expenses on labor to be paid in higher money wages. That's 1. 2, faster growth and pro-worker regulation and universal health insurance would all help push wages up. The CBO, Congressional Budget Office, economic forecasts imply that annual real wages for the average American worker will grow by about $1,300 or 3% for the next decade as a whole. Faster growth under the Sanders program would add another $2,200 in average wages. Regulatory programs, notably a higher minimum wage, would add nearly another $3,000. Still more for women who would benefit from new pay equity regulations. Finally, universal health insurance would add nearly another $5,000 for workers who would no longer have to pay private health insurance premiums. Now let me pause. Where are we here? I just tossed out a bunch of numbers. The Congressional Budget Office says the average American worker, the wages, over the next decade as a whole, not every year, but over the next decade, would grow by about $1,300. The Sanders plan says $1,300 plus another $22, that would be $35, plus another $3,000, that would be $65, plus another $5,000, which would be $11,500 from the get-go. Only a small increase is expected in average wages from the Workplace Democracy Act, which would establish a card check unionization and first contract arbitration, because these policies would likely do little to increase union membership. So what he's talking about, this Workplace Democracy Act, which is a bunch of bullshit, won't do anything. But that's what the Republicans and the Democrats, especially the Democrats, especially the Clintonian Democrats, that's what they're pushing. They're saying, well, we don't need all this. We've got the Workplace Democracy Act, which is bullshit. Next, this is number 3. There's only 5. Here's number 3. Taxes on the wealthy would pay for widely shared benefits. Sanders would finance Sanders would finance expanded infrastructure. That means repairing the shit that needs repaired in this country. Universal free pre-K education, free public higher education, universal health insurance, and other programs with progressive taxation and through the elimination of tax deductions for rich individuals and large corporations. While the benefits of the increased spending would be widely shared, increases in income taxes and other targeted tax changes would be borne mostly by the richest Americans. Almost half of the tax changes would be paid by the richest 5%, and nearly 30% of that by the richest 1%. In addition, measures like a financial transaction tax levied on the gamblers on Wall Street, and elimination of favored tax treatments for fossil fuels. How many times we talked about the oil industry gets all these tax breaks, these fuckwads. Anyway, that all would promote greater economic efficiency by discouraging economically and environmentally harmful activities. Let me digress a second. You know, we live in a world that runs on money. If you can change the way the world uses the money, you can change all sorts of other outcomes. That's something you and I don't pay any attention to, but it's the truth. You can't do that shit when you live in a barter system. If I'm going to trade my cow for your horse, it stops right there. But if I've got $1,000 and I use it to buy into a factory over in Sri Lanka or something, you see what I'm saying? As long as we live in a money economy, changes in monetary policy have effects that reach clear across the cultural and political spectrum. Back to this. 4, the Sanders program would dramatically bring down poverty. Since the 1960s, the U.S. poverty rate has remained stuck between 11 and 15%. Economic growth, as forecast by the Congressional Budget Office, would do little to lower the poverty rate over the next decade. Faster growth and targeted increases in wages and Social Security benefits under the Sanders program, in contrast, would dramatically lower the poverty rate. Higher employment, higher wages, and especially increases in the minimum wage would lift virtually all working Americans and their families out of poverty. Increasing the minimum Social Security benefit and using a more appropriate price index to adjust benefits for inflation, meanwhile, would lift the elderly and disabled out of poverty. Now, as ignorant as I am about matters economic, in reading this stuff over the past day or two, this is so simple. And it's the simplicity that's driving the political class and the neoliberals fucking insane. They can't argue the numbers, so they try to smear William Friedman, who came up with the analysis, and by extension, Bernie Sanders. Last one. Sanders' regulatory and tax programs would sharply reduce inequality. The ratio of the average income of the richest 5% to that of the poorest 20% has increased from less than 11 to 1 in the early 1970s to about 23 to 1 today. Economic policy and growth rates forecast by the CBO would allow this ratio to grow even greater, to over 27 to 1 by 2026, 11 years from now. While faster economic growth due to the Sanders program would narrow differentials slightly, this effect is limited because faster growth also increases corporate profits. By raising wages at the bottom, the Sanders regulatory program, especially the higher minimum wage, would do much more to reduce inequality. By ensuring that the rich pay their fair share of taxes, meanwhile, Sanders' progressive taxation program will also dramatically bring down inequality. Now, that, truth seekers, is Sanders' economic plan. There are some graphs and charts that go with it. If you want to see the graphs and charts, you're going to have to do your own damn research. Let me find it here. Yeah, all right. If you really want to look at it, shit. I don't know. I've got it right here, and it's written in plain English that you and I could understand, but there's numbers and words, and numbers and words, and no pictures, I think I've pretty much covered it. It starts out as a question as to why. why economists who have not studied, who have not looked at, what's the guy's name, Charles Friedman, have not looked at Gerald Friedman's analysis of Bernie Sanders' economic plan. These guys have not looked at it. They've just dismissed it out of hand and said, well, you know, we've spent our careers trying to point out the bullshit with the Republicans, and now here comes Gerald Friedman and Bernie Sanders with bullshit from Democrats. What's this about? And they call it bullshit because every single one of those four economists that I talked about, and I have to admit, I'm sorry to say, Krugman too, apparently, they all are subscribers to this neoliberal bullshit that has produced this problem to begin with.